Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle, and today we're going to kind of jump back in time. We're going to look at two Silver Series reels. They always were a point of comparison back in the 70s and the 80s. One is the Penn reel. It's made in Japan. In this case, it's the 104, and followed by a 104C. This one's very sluggish. We're going to take this one apart today, and we're going to see, show you what it was made of, how to service it, and hopefully improve the performance on that. And then the one that was a comparison, which is a Daiwa. This is the Daiwa Silver Series. It was the 2600C. This one works a little bit more smoothly, but in the next video, we'll take this one apart, show you what it's made out of, and how to service this one as well. So there was a debate for a while there about which one was better, and both of these are made in Japan. Both of those were competing against each other at the time. Both of these had bigger brothers. The Penn had the Spin Fisher, and the Daiwa had the Black Gold series. And between the two of them, these were more the entry-level models. Didn't have as many bearings and the like, but both of them were moderately priced on the high end of an entry level, and both of them certainly got the job done. So we're going to start with the Penn. I'll reserve judgment on which one I prefer, but we'll start with the Penn. This is a single ball bearing reel. This one is sluggish. Lots of boat rash on this one, so it's probably not been maintained as well as it should. By the sluggishness, it would kind of tell me it probably hasn't had service in a while, and we'll go discover all of that as we go into this reel. As you'll notice, I'm wearing a protective glove. I use a parts basket for my small pieces and parts, and I try to let you play along with me as we do this. So I'm going to start by taking the handle off, then I'm going to take the spool off as well. I'll reverse that by taking the drag knob adjuster out, and the spool. We'll come into the spool later with the drag washers. And now we can get to the case. So I'm expecting to see either a lot of dried grease in here or no grease in here. That's the way this one is performing. So this reel, as I mentioned, this was a lower end edition. Single ball bearing, 2 bushings on each of the sides of the main gear. It has a cam drive for the axle to move it up and down, and the reel itself, if properly maintained, will last a long time. Yeah, this is what we would expect. We see some dried grease in here. Not a lot of grease in here at all, which says it hasn't been maintained in quite some time. What is the right schedule for maintenance? I like to advise at least once a year. There's a conversation about whether we should go out and service the reel at the beginning of the season or the end of the season. And what I would prefer to do is to do it at the end of the season. And the way because of that is when you're putting this reel into storage, or any reel into storage, particularly if you're going to store it in a hot shed or a cold environment, then you want to make sure it's as protected as can be for those elements in storage. If you do it at the beginning of the year, you might accumulate a lot of contaminants and the like, and allowing them to sit over time could corrupt the metal and just lead to bigger problems before you get to it at the beginning of the season. So I like to say at least once a year, depending on how much you fish, minimum once a year, and preferably at the end of the season rather than the beginning of the season. So this is the first bushing. This is the gear side bushing. It has a little shim. That shim serves to keep a collar against the cam here. That's the crosswind function. And this cam simply sits on a pin on the crosswind block, so it comes off like that. If you don't know this reel, if you haven't worked on this reel in a while, 2 things I advise. One, take pictures of the reel as you take it apart. That way it'll give you a reference point for where these pieces and parts go. And then as you reassemble, if you get stuck, you can go back and look at those pictures. The other thing I would advise is get the schematic for the reel. The schematic for the reel is available at mysticparts.com. That's the former pennparts.com site. And if you go there, it'll show you the exploded view, so you'll know if you get stuck and didn't take the pictures, you'll know approximately the locations of these pieces. Okay, the big point is out. There's a small point that rides in the channel underneath on the crosswind block. I took the screw out of the crosswind block, and now we can pull the axle shaft off. And here's an indication that this hasn't been serviced in a while. There's a lot of grease and contaminants on there. Quick way to clean that is simply with steel wool. If you run the steel wool on it enough, it should shine up. And we're fortunate here, it did shine up nicely. So again, into my parts tray with that. Here's your main gear. You want to pull that next. You want to look on the main gear. Now, dry as a bone, right? A bone in the desert, I guess. All the teeth, you want to make sure that they're all there, that they're not chipped. You want to do it this way as well. You want to make sure that there's no excessive wear in a particular area of it. And we've got some superficial rust on here. I don't think it's anything more than just that. It's a discoloration more than it is a corrosion. If you did have that as a problem, again, you could take that steel wool and rub it down just to make sure it's smooth. You can see it's cleaning up here, because that's where that cam is going to ride for the crosswind block. So you want to make sure that you get a nice efficient channel for that to slide on. And we'll come back and grease that in just a moment. So that's going into my parts bin. Here's that block. I mentioned you have a tall pin and a short pin. You want to notice the orientation on that. Again, you can use the steel wool to clean that up and get rid of any dried grease that's on there as well. Okay, so that's the bottom of the reel. The case is clean. It says this thing hasn't been maintained in a while, and this thing certainly hasn't seen grease in way too long. But there's one more bushing over on this side here. And we'll go up top there, and I'll show you what's going on up top. So if you remove the top, in this case it's a traditional clockwise to tighten and counterclockwise to loosen the rotor. So we'll take that off. Take the top off, and this is an older design anti-reverse. It's certainly not the instant anti-reverse that we've become accustomed to today. This is a friction anti-reverse. It has a V-clip on it, and that clip rides on both sides of the anti-reverse cog, or whatever we may call that. And so when it's riding under reeling, you'll see it, nothing happens, it just kind of sits idly. But there's a friction as you go to backpedal the reel, it pulls the anti-reverse dog in. So again, it'll ride free. As you backpedal, it'll go grab that next tooth that's available. Common design, quite some time ago. You see that in a lot of bait casting reels, interestingly enough, that friction key. If you find that is not working, the best thing to do in that is just grab a pair of pliers. I'm just going to pull this out, you can see it. And just tighten it down a little bit, just so you increase the friction. I'm doing it with my fingers here, but you can actually pull that in with pliers, increase the friction on that slide. I'm going to just take the top off, just to again show you how to reset. There's no springs involved in this one, so that's why I want to show you how to reset, because I put it on backwards. There you go. So that's the reset for that. Now, there's a collar after that, and then there's a bearing. Now, the bearing seems to be turning fine, so I'm not going to go ahead and pull the shaft. There's no reason to, particularly on a service. If you find that the bearing is not performing the way you'd like it to, then certainly pull the two screws out, remove the collar, pull the bearing through. I'm simply going to oil that bearing, because it probably hasn't had a good drink in a while. I'm also going to come in under this side and oil that bearing as well. Just flood it out. There's no problem with that. And then on this pinion gear itself, there's some accumulated junk in the threads there. I'm leaving these right on the table because we're just going to go right back in, but I'm just going to run a screwdriver through here just to make sure that the channels are clear. It's a flat-bladed screwdriver. We're just running down, I feel there's a little grit buildup. Take your time. You got all the time in the world to do one of these. That's some of the fun part about doing it yourself. You're not under any kind of time constraints here. So just make sure that they're clear. I'm almost done. There's not that many channels on this. But you can You may be able to hear it. I can hear it. There's a little grit that is accumulated right on top of where the main gear would stop. So you can do it that way. Also, just to show you another method, you can take a little wire brush and just kind of scream it out that way. All right, so once we're done with that, then we want to put some new grease on it. I'm going to use a Penn precision reel grease. Now this happens to be a Penn reel I'm working on, but you don't need Penn reel grease for Penn reels. And if you use Penn Reels grease on another brand manufacturer, all the better for you. Just make sure that whatever grease you're using, that the grease is designed for fishing reels. I've told the story more than once that there's all kinds of fishing reels that I've seen over time that just have had, well, let's just say crazy grease schemes from axle grease and things like that. Okay, so I'm going to take this assembly then. We're just going to go right ahead and put that back. We had the collar, that's going to go on after we oiled that bearing. I'm going to slip that anti-reverse on, line that up with the hole, and then we're going to put that screw back in. Now if I was stepping away from this reel for a while, these pieces would certainly go into my parts tray because they're very small pieces and they can bounce all over a tabletop or a desk or what have you. And there's nothing worse than trying to find those pieces and parts later. So this screw has a collar on it. You just need to make sure that as you're putting this back, that you don't leave it without that collar being fully in the anti-reverse dog. It's easy to get that collar to stop on top of the metal if it's not properly lined up. So go ahead and make sure that you just kind of wiggle it or what have you. And then we can just test it again, just to make sure. Oops, we have the reverse override on. Just to make sure that it's operating properly, which it is. You can see there. Okay, so we've greased up the main gear. Let's go ahead and reassemble this portion then, because there's nothing much more we can do there. Hasn't had grease in a while. We're going to make sure that we get some grease on top of the post here that's going to go into the bushing. We'll go ahead and put the main gear back in. Get that crosswind block. Now that rides in the channel, so let's just go put a hunk of grease on the back of that and set that into the channel. You don't have to grease outside the case, you just want to grease the moving parts. Here's that, oops, we don't want to do that yet. Let's get the rotor. So I put the main gear in, but you usually have to push the rotor up like this in order to, push the main pinion gear up so that you can get this to protrude so that you can put the nut back on that. So just use your finger to hold it. We noted as we took this off that this is a traditional clockwise tightening, counterclockwise loosening. So I'm getting as much of it done by hand as I can. The reason for that is these are brass gears. If you don't do it by hand, you risk kind of stripping it out when you start. Okay, we've fallen off here with this. Let's put that back in. We've got we got something tightened up there. So it's always good to test these things, find out what's going on. Something is not cooperating under there. Whatever it was, it seems to have redeemed itself. Let's just make sure we have we have the anti-reverse. Okay, so whatever it was, probably over-tightened the nut or something. The new ones today have cap nuts on there that you can't over-tighten. Very interesting. All right, main gear in. We saw that there was a lot of old grease and stuff on there, so let's just put some fresh grease on. Not too much. It's pretty tight tolerances coming through the pinion gear, so if you put too much on, it's only going to bubble off anyway. Just looking at this is the value of a parts tray here. Just that those little screws don't get lost. So here's that little screw that holds the axle shaft in place. axles, me and small pieces don't get together very well. There we go. Didn't have the hole quite lined up, and that's what will happen if you don't. Alright, you seem to have it now. Then we're going to put that cam on that drives the axle shaft up and down, and we noted that there was a little bit of poor performance there. You can see that there's a little bit of buildup on the back here, so I'm going to do the same thing with this. I'm just going to get the junk off of it. You can probably see why it was deteriorating in terms of flow when you have all of that stuff kind of acting as a natural brake. So again, a little bit of lubrication on this to make sure that it performs properly. We seat that over the ring and over the pin, like that. And there was that little collar washer that held that between the bushing. And coming down to the smaller pieces now. So now we have the bushing, which has been cleaned. We have the side plate, so I'm going to insert the bushing into the side plate. And I'm going to make sure that, that we have a nice amount of grease on the post as well for the main gear, and then we can reassemble. Quick check in the parts tray to make sure that all of the pieces and parts are out of there, that should be out of there. Notice that there's one screw which belongs in the case here, and then we can go retighten. So right now, just because the squeaky wheel got the oil, this wheel should be a whole lot smoother to operate before we even go any further. And then what we'll do is we'll go up top and service the drags, because I'm sure if the rest of the reel is like this, then the drags probably need to be cleaned as well. So the 104 was a medium-sized, I guess by today's standards would be a 50-60 size of a reel, and it would be destined for inshore salt water or deeper lakes. Here we go. Well, there's a world of difference there. There's no question about that. Okay, so before I go up top to do the drags, a little bit more, I got some more oil here. Just going to oil around the bail on both sides. Oil the joint on the handle, oil the knob, just because this hasn't seen oil in a while. There you go, makes it much smoother already. So I'm going to try and find a cap for this. Again, you can fish this reel without the cap. It frequently became lost over time. If you get the cap, it's going to keep the water out of there. You can see there's a little rust in the channel there. If you can keep the water out of there, you don't have to service it as much. Also, there's that rust, boat rash on the reel itself. That can be steel wooled off. We're down into the case metal here. So it's all a matter of how much you want to put in terms of effort into that. All right, so then the last part then, it's the spool itself. The drag washers sit inside the spool. So we're going to go ahead and grab a pin. This is a common setup for a drag washer in a spool assembly. You have a clip ring in there. The clip rings will vary. Some will be square, some of them will be octagon, some of them will be circular. But all of them pretty much serve the same purpose. You don't have to do anything with these. These are Teflon drags, but you sure as heck got to clean that channel out there, and that's what I kind of expected to see. Just a whole bunch of junk in there, because that's the top drag reels take the brunt of everything that you're fishing with. The water that splashes up on that reel settles in here. Sand if you on the beach, all kinds of things, and if you do that, that channel gets clogged and the drag just doesn't work effectively. So I've used a little bit of WD-40, a cotton swab, and we've just cleaned that channel. So these are Teflon. By nature, they're kind of a petroleum product and they're self-lubricating. You don't need to do anything with them other than make sure they're nice and clean. So it goes in a series here. The first one is a plastic washer, followed by a metal washer, followed by this Next, Teflon washer, followed by the eared washer. The eared washer always goes in the middle of these spin fishing reels. You notice the two keys on each end and the two indentations in the spool. And we go to the last one in terms of a washer. Last one for the top here. And I'm just rubbing it to get the debris off of that. If there was more debris than that, you could use the steel wool like I showed you on the other one to get some of the pieces of that off. This is a spring clip. To reload it, you just got to find the groove. Notice the operative word there was spring. That's not a season. It's a shooting star, if you will. Make sure that as you go to reload, you keep your finger on there so that that doesn't shoot. Okay, we're done with the drag surface. We're done with the reel, basically, other than just putting this in, grabbing that drag tensioner knob, tighten it down to make sure that our drags are working properly. And depending on what kind of fish you're going for is going to depend on how you're going to tighten that reel. There we go, now we're not moving. Okay, so this is the Penn 104. Like I said, you can see it's a whole lot better than it was. And it's been serviced, it's ready to go fishing. It's ready to compete against this Daiwa 2600C. So next video we'll do is the 2600C. We'll get to do that side-by-side comparison for you. And then you can make your choice in terms of whether you like the Penn or whether you like the Daiwa. In either case, both of them were great reels at the time at an affordable price. Both of them are still on my desk 25, 30 years after they were purchased. It's a testimony to their ability to survive and the quality of the manufacturer and the pieces and parts in them. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like it. If you want to see more, please subscribe. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. I wish you good fishing.